We now move on to the second part of our evening, and I'm very proud to be able to announce the recipients of our Autism CRC Awards for achievement in Autism Spectrum Research. This year we've received a record number of applications, and it's very encouraging to see a shift in the research landscape towards more inclusive research projects and practices, and this can only be commended. It's a really strong component of our overall program. The awardees tonight have demonstrated very high levels of engagement with autistic individuals in the autism community across three very diverse projects that have the capacity to realise long-term benefits. This year we're going to be awarding 3 projects in 2 categories. Very happy to let you know that I was sternly reprimanded for suggesting there can only be one winner. And levels of violence may have ensued if we ever tried to separate the 2 winners in one category. They're all very worthy recipients. We're lucky enough to have our awardees here with us tonight, and each of them will be delivering a short presentation about their projects. And then following the 3 presentations, our Autism CRC Chief Operations Officer, Wojciech Nadachowski, is going to facilitate questions from you for our awardees. So without further ado, I'm going to announce our recipients. In the category of research translation, the winning project is Raising Awareness of the Needs of Autistic Australians. This project has involved the Australian Autism Alliance engaging Professor Sandra Jones, an autistic autism researcher from Australian Catholic University, to refine, conduct and analyse a survey of autistic adults and their family members. The outcomes informed the Alliance's submission to the Federal Senate Select Committee on Autism, which was seeking to understand the experiences of and identify the services, supports and needs of autistic people in Australia, and to explore the need for a national autism strategy. One reviewer said that the application demonstrates that the research was extensive with high engagement. The focus on intersectionality is needed and will benefit underrepresented groups. Collaboration with the autistic community has been evidenced, and the size of the population that participated in the research will mean the research will be considered for greater financial support initiatives to benefit the autistic community and their supporters. So congratulations again to Sandra and team on being the recipients of our 2021 Research Translation Award. And we're going to hear more details, as I said earlier, about the project from Sandra shortly. The inclusive research category was jointly awarded. The first project in the inclusive research category is Priorities of Autistic People in Australia and Their Families for Autism Services and Supports. This project was led by Trevor Clark from Aspect Research Centre for Autism Practice, or ARCAP, with research funded by Autism Spectrum Australia, more commonly known as Aspect. The main aim of this study was to ensure the organisational plan and the research agenda of RCAP are directly related to the needs of autistic and autism communities in Australia. This participatory research is important to the provision of services, programs and resources to support autistic people and their families. The study asked autistic people about their own perceptions of what a good life is and how to best achieve it. The research questions and design centred on the idea that autistic people and their carers or parents are best situated to inform what research and inquiry is needed in the autism practice field. Feedback from one reviewer stated that implementation of this evidence-based research will have impact organisation-wide, and it's a credit to Aspect that they are prioritising the community needs and translating the findings in an accessible manner. So congratulations again to Trevor and the team on being one of the 2 recipients of our 2021 Inclusive Research Award. And again, we'll hear more details about the project shortly. Finally, I'm very pleased to announce our second winning project in the Inclusive Research category is Investigating Autistic Burnout, which is a project co-led and co-produced by Dr. Samuel Arnold and autistic advocate and peer researcher Julianne Higgins. Sam and Julianne conducted 2 studies to define autistic burnout and explore its risk factors. The co-leads work closely together throughout the entire process, from conceptualising the research to developing the study materials and drafting the grant application, to analysing the data and interpreting and disseminating the findings. Again, one project reviewer said, the project focuses on an area that has been increasingly highlighted as in need of further research. It takes a co-produced approach throughout the project lifecycle, placing autistic people and their experiences at the centre. It's good to see the translation of the research into peer-reviewed journal articles, as well as presentations at key national and international conferences. So congratulations again to Sam and Julianne and their team on being recipients of our 2021 Inclusive Research Award. And again, we'll hear more details about their project very shortly. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all of the entrants and especially our recipients, and also a sincere thank you to our reviewers, who are obviously critical in the selection process. So now I'm pleased to introduce Autism CRC Chief Operating Officer Wojciech Nadachowski, who is going to facilitate the presentations and then the subsequent Q&A session with our award recipients. So over to you, Voy.
Thank you, Rob. Great to be here. Another great year of work. As Rob has indicated, we will now hear presentations from each of our awardees. Just like in the previous session with Andrew, you will have the option to ask questions in two ways. You can either submit test questions via the Q&A pane, or if you'd like to be able to turn your camera on and your microphone to ask your question in person, you can use the raise a hand tool. You can send in the text questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect them and address them, as many as we can during the Q&A session, along with any questions that people would like to ask in person. I'm now very pleased to invite Professor Sandra Jones to tell us more about the award-winning project, Raising Awareness of the Needs of Autistic Australians. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to try and stick to the time limit. I have so much to say, but I will try and stick to the time limit. So this is really, we saw this as research translation from the ground up. So this is about research that starts with translation and then works out what research we need. So everyone would be aware about the Senate Select Committee on Autism that was held last year, which was aiming to understand the experiences of autistic people, their needs, and explore the need for a national autism strategy. In early 2020, the Australian Autism Alliance contacted me and my team to ask if we would be involved in doing this survey, and we were delighted, and a huge thank you to the Alliance for their trust, and particularly to Fiona Sharkey and Paul McAuliffe for knowing how much I would want to do this. So we conducted the survey. It was very, very much an inclusive project. So the study design and the data collection instruments were reviewed and approved by a panel of representatives from the autism support and advocacy organisations that constitute the Australian Autism Alliance. Members of those organisations, but also other members of the autistic community and autism community, provided an iterative review of the questionnaire over a period of 4 weeks. This was research done very, very fast, as you can imagine, because we had to get data ready for the submission, and just a huge amount of effort from everyone to make sure that we had the questions right, and to ensure that we covered all of the areas that were important to the community. Lots of questions in the survey. So we had questions on the process and outcomes of autism diagnosis, accessing, receiving and utilising support from the NDIS, primary and secondary education, post-secondary education, employment, housing and independence, interactions with the justice system, healthcare, both physical and mental healthcare, social and recreational activities, and advocacy. So it was a long survey, and a huge thank you to the many, many people who actually went all the way through and completed this, and you'll see just how many there were in a moment. Lots of work in promoting the survey. So all of the Autism Alliance members really promoted this survey. Lots of other people came on board, lots of other organisations, lots of other individuals. So it was promoted a lot on social media, word of mouth, blogging, emails, everything we could do to get the message out to the community, this was our opportunity to say what we wanted to say to government. We originally had a target of 200 people, so we got more than that. We received 3,884 surveys. 769 were autistic adults responding on behalf of themselves. 3,115 were parents or carers reporting on behalf of an autistic person. And importantly, 257 were autistic adults who were also parents or carers of autistic people. And they had the option to complete the survey twice. And as you can see, 257 people took that option. So the data set is actually the largest and most comprehensive compilation of autistic voices in Australia and internationally. And it's a massive data set because within each of those categories that I mentioned, we also had an open-ended question, is there anything else you would like to say? So we have a huge amount of data. We were really pleased to get responses from underrepresented groups. So we had 42 Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander autistic adults and a significant proportion as well of people reporting on behalf of children, but this is just the adults. 656 adult females, 444 people living in rural and remote areas, and 352 LGBTIQ plus adults. So a really good sample, and all of those categories also appear in the sample of people being reported on by parents. So we've really got some great intersectionality data there that just doesn't exist in Australia. And we're very excited about that and being able to dig deeper into that. So what did we find in the survey? We found some disturbing things, unfortunately, also a few positive things. So almost 3/4 of those with an autism diagnosis undertook that through the private system. So it is expensive for Australians to get an autism diagnosis. Over half of our autistic adults reported that they were previously diagnosed with some other condition prior to their autism diagnosis and were subsequently told that that previous diagnosis was incorrect. You're a lot more likely to receive NDIS funding if you're a child than you are as an adult, which is a bit concerning with a lifelong condition. And probably for me, the thing that was of most concern with that was that of the adults who had applied and not received NDIS funding, more than 80% said they were not provided with any information on other supports that might be available. So they went through the process of applying for NDIS, they didn't get it, and they got no recommendations where to go next. Education and employment. So about 1/3 of parents in primary or secondary school said that they felt their child had been discriminated against at school or when seeking to access an education. Over 1/4 of autistic adults were in post-secondary education. It should be a lot more than that, I know, but that's still a good finding. It also gave us a good sample to find out what some of the challenges are, and a lot of people reporting that adjustments made in post-secondary education were inadequate. Approximately half of autistic adults were currently employed, but more than half of those who were not currently in paid work would like to be. So there's a large degree of under and unemployment. Lots of access of healthcare. So the majority reported accessing one or more healthcare providers, including quite high levels of use of emergency services, and also reporting significant autism-related challenges in accessing healthcare and also in the lack of autism knowledge and awareness among healthcare professionals. 1/3 of those with a mental health condition had not been able to get appropriate support. And those who had experience with the justice system, more than half said that the knowledge and understanding of police and or courts and prisons was poor, their knowledge of autism, and that they weren't supported to have their say. So how do we translate those findings? Obviously, the primary outcome was a report to the Alliance on the findings of the study. This included a full report, which is very long, as you can imagine, with all that data. Also, a summary report in easy read format, which was available for public and community access, and also an online presentation to Alliance members on the findings. The data was then used to present the views of autistic Australians and their families to the Select Committee. So that was the Autism Alliance submission, also the overview that they provided, and I was involved. I was very, very privileged to be invited to join the Autism Alliance's team that presented to the Senate Select Committee and talk about what we had found and what the needs were of autistic people. But obviously that's a huge data set, and we did that. We didn't want to stop with that. We thought there was so much more in there. So we see this as a living resource, and we're actively pursuing a range of projects using that data. So we've currently just wrapping up a project on carers' perspectives to school supports for autistic students, a project on the benefits and disadvantages of an adult autism diagnosis. We're looking at the data on the healthcare needs and experiences. And we, as I said, have a number of other projects on the boil. And importantly, each of these projects we obviously disseminate academically, so in a journal article or a research student thesis, but also producing video summaries of key findings for the community. As I said, I think that this research differs in some ways from traditional research translation. This wasn't a study developed by researchers to ask a question that was academically interesting, and then how can we translate it to policy. It was actually developed by the community for addressing the issues that were of concern. Obviously, scientific rigour was very important. We had an experienced team of researchers, and a huge thank you to my colleague Chloe Gordon, and also to Simone and Josh for all the help in getting this done. Chloe did a mammoth amount of work. So we had an experienced team of researchers and rigorous data, but at the same time, a constant focus on the purpose of this project. This project was done to translate the findings into meaningful policy and practice recommendations to benefit the autistic community.
That was a great presentation. Thank you very much. That is I mean, apart from the research and the great work you've done, obviously that data set that you've now, I guess, invested in and created is going to be used in the future years and probably around the world. So that's terrific work. Well done. I would now like to invite Dr. Trevor Clark and Krishna Sadana to tell us some more about their award-winning project, Priorities of Autistic People in Australia and Their Families for Autism Services and Support. Over to you, Trevor and Krishna.
Thanks for that. And Rob, I think you gave such a good overview of the project earlier on when you announced the awards that I think you've stolen our thunder, but never mind. So we'll just do a quick walk through what this particular project was about. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank all the autistic people, including the group of autistic adolescent students who are part of this project, parents and carers who participated in the study. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the Research Priorities Project Advisory Group members who stayed with this project. You know, it's been almost 2 years. They gave great advice and support to the research team. And special thanks to Krishna Sadana, who is a member of the advisory group who's co-presenting tonight with me. And on behalf of Aspect and RCAP, which is its research arm, I want to thank the CRC for this award tonight, and importantly for spiriting the inclusive partnership approach to autism research. The research, RCAP research to practice partnership approach, we developed this approach probably, it was about 2 years ago actually. And it is the approach that we use to undertake all our research, our co-produced autism practice research at Aspect. And we're not going through the steps, but from initial consultation, the first phase of the process, right through the translation of research into outcomes within Aspect itself, into its support services and programs. And partnership approach is central to this project tonight. So just very quickly, the aims of the Research Priorities Project to ensure that the future autism practice research is focused on supporting autistic people and their families and carers to realise their own goals and aspirations. So that was the reason why we developed this Research Priorities Project. There are actually 2 stages to the project. So we've completed the first stage, which really is the reason we've been given this award this evening. And it's got the focus, this project, really aligned to services and supports. And stage 1 involved in-depth interviews. I'll just outline that in a moment, stage 1. And stage 2, we're about to commence recruitment next week, is reflecting back the themes from the first stage, what people believe are important to them to have a good life, and of course, what do they need, want in terms of services, supports for a good life, and of course, you know, in those interviews, the barriers to having a good life, of course, were reflected very clearly. This, as I mentioned before, we had a research project advisory group to support the project, and they're still there as we move to the second stage. It was made up of autistic adults, differing gender identities, parents, carers of autistic children, and practitioners also of aspect services, the major 2 service arms, of course, the ARCAT researchers, and an independent advisor, which in this case was Liz Pellicano, who I'm sure you all know from Macquarie University. I'll pass to Krishna.
Hi. I've been in the privileged position of not doing very much research, but still receiving the accolades. However, the expertise and guidance throughout the project by an autistic group of people was not only helpful, but essential. But why essential? Many of us have a diminished sense of ownership of our own lives, our environment, our world. You often hear us feeling as if we don't fit in, as if we don't think that we belong, that we are not being heard. So there is great value in being involved in research that is about us, is for us. This process has given me, that's very moving actually, it's been very moving. This process has given me a sense of purpose and inclusion, but more importantly, I feel that I'm contributing to the improvement of others that are also on the spectrum, my community. I believe that this research and all its unfolding projects primarily exist to inform and improve interactions with and services to autistic people. Even the process of being involved has started to undermine my own sense of being lesser than, of being broken, of being not good enough. It had an unexpected benefit to me as an autistic individual. It's not unreasonable to expect partnership and co-design going into the future. Emphasis should be on establishing and maintaining meaningful relationships with autistic people. We are the ones with the lived experience and the ones that will be directly impacted by the responses to this intricate research. And here's my last 2 sentences, which I particularly love. It's not okay to retrofit projects or shoehorn us into services that might not work for us. It's time to trust autistic people. We have all got this. Thank you. Over to you, Trevor.
Great, thanks, Krishna. So as I just mentioned, the first stage of the project were in-depth interviews. So primarily the interviews focused on what we want to know, what do autistic young people and adults in Australia and their primary carers, I can't read under the gallery there. So the key 3 things, the most important components of a good life for them is defined for their quality of life and well-being, services and support that they need or want to have a good life, and as I mentioned, the barriers that exist for them accessing those services and supports. Just in terms of that study, the first phase, there were 79 people took part. There's the breakdown of 33 autistic adults, 14 young people, they were adolescents, mainly attending the aspect, satellite mainstream class provision, 31 parents and carers. And we gave them options of different ways to access or be involved in the interviews. I just need to say that in terms of the interviews, the researchers conducting the interviews, there was actually 69% of the adult interviews were undertaken by one of the autistic researchers or autistic staff at Aspect. And we thought that was particularly important. You know, the interviews are so in depth. And yeah, all except one of the interviews with autistic adolescents were actually conducted by a young autistic man who also works for Aspect. There's the team that I brought on the screen a bit too early. So a great bunch, and they carry on to the second stage of the project. And just finally, this is a project that when we're saying it was developed to inform the future research agenda for Aspect, as our ex-CEO, I think it might be on the meeting tonight, noticed, you know, we refreshed the strat plan. And so the 2022-24 strat plan has already been signed off by our board, and locked into that strat plan are the research outcomes, the projects coming out of the research priorities project. In our business plan next year, just so people can understand where we're going with this project, we have a minimum of 3 projects arising from the major themes and from the survey, the stage 2. We're committed, locked in to develop those, and they'll be again developed in partnership with a smaller group of autistic people and staff and families and carers as we take those research projects forward. And Krishna, I'm going to hand to you to finish.
Thank you, Trevor. So involving autistic people is a way of safeguarding the authenticity of research. I wrote a short poem about the importance of partnership. Don't worry, it's really short. Partnership, co-design, co-produce. What are all these buzzwords? Is it tokenism disguised by sandwiches and free soft drinks? Although I did enjoy those wrap things with cheese in them. Or is it an opportunity for us to find our voice, to be part of something bigger, to shape our world? Maybe that's the meaning of living a good life. That works for me. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Trevor and Krishna. And Krishna, very much share your thoughts about co-production and co-design. I think they are very much essential to the future of research that is meaningful and that will have, I guess, both acceptance and longer term impact. So thanks a lot for your poem. Okay, so we have our final presentation now by the project co-leads, Dr. Sam Arnold and Julianne Higgins, about the award-winning project investigating autistic burnout. Sam and Julianne have pre-recorded their presentation, so let's see that now.
Thank you for the recognition and opportunity to speak about our inclusive research on autistic burnout. Autistic burnout has been discussed in social media since 2005. However, until recently, this phenomenon remained unknown in academic circles. UK autistic blogger, teacher and parent Kieran Rose commented, "Burnout is an integral part of the life of an autistic person, yet nobody, apart from autistic people, seems to know about it." Just as the scene in this painting disappears beneath the bullet hole, so does the integrity of the autistic person when severely challenged by the bullets of hostile environments and unaccommodating interpersonal interactions. The integrity of the person is obliterated by the manifestation of pain, mental, physical, and emotion. In a way, paralyzed, with autistic burnout responses and inabilities taking over. The observer and external participant witnesses the results of this destruction, has no idea of the nature and suffering of this actual experience.
Unfortunately, we don't have time today to go into detail, but wanted to highlight to you key findings and the importance of an inclusive approach, co-led by an autistic peer researcher and non-autistic academic. In our first study, we created a consensus definition of autistic burnout using grounded Delphi method. We then validated this definition as well as testing a new autistic burnout measure released by the American Aspire group.
When Sam and I were discussing priorities for autism research, autistic burnout came up as a topic for study. At that time, there were no published studies on autistic burnout. We considered it critical, the direction of the study being informed by the autistic voice from the very beginning, which then flowed on to establishing the direction of the second survey study. The grounded Delphi method brings together grounded theory and Delphi, both well suited to exploratory research, and grounded theory particularly suited to theory building. The GDM ensures the integrity of the study is preserved as it cautions against the influence of a priori assumptions. From the outset, autistic voice was preserved by having experts by lived experience for autistic burnout respond initially to several open-ended questions. Autistic voice is critical and too often missing from our reading of autism research literature. Too often the experiences of autistics are being misrepresented by non-autistic self-referential perspectives. Autistic involvement facilitates meaningful outcomes and depth of understanding. Experts were first asked what autistic burnout meant to them, and then to go on to describe their burnout experience. Subsequently, more specific questions were asked, such as the comparison of autistic burnout and depression. As the autistic peer researcher, I led the grounded theory qualitative analysis and identified the following integrative framework. Energy arose as the core category, being the essential ingredient affecting and affected throughout each of the major categories of onset, impact, recovery, and their subcategories. One expert commented on life for an autistic being like a video game energy bar, where the energy level is continually depleted until burnout ensues. We have added this visual metaphor as representing an autistic person who is constantly drained from the neurotypical world and who easily slips into negative energy. Regarding energy, the autist goes on to say, social interactions, sensory input, and unexpected change is depleted. If I don't get the time I need to recover, I'll start each day with progressively lower reserves until I reach full-scale autistic burnout. And recovery can be incomplete. I am still affected by it, and I don't feel I am back to full capacity.
We arrived at this consensus definition following 3 rounds of survey. You can see we used a DSM-5 format as we wanted to understand autistic experience as well as influence clinical practice. In our second study, we sought to validate now published definitions of autistic burnout. We wanted to identify relationships with other factors conceptually related to burnout and validate the new measurement tool from the Aspire team.
Overall survey responses in study 2 confirmed what participants had told us in study 1, with this participant describing, I showed more autistic traits, had trouble communicating fluently, struggled to make sentences that made sense, wasn't able to mask well, became suicidal and questioned the midpoint of life, and wasn't able to do everyday things such as showering, cooking, cleaning, and became withdrawn and found it a lot easier to be myself. Participants highlighted the need for recognition and support. Despite my diagnosis, I feel my ASD is not recognised or accepted by most people, including family, the NDIS, and the mental health system. So trying to convince them I am experiencing autistic burnout on a regular basis is well nigh impossible. Qualitative data highlighted the differences that arise from difference in perspective, as theorised in the double empathy problem. As our data only showed one side of this difficulty, with autistic people being not listened to and their requests being dismissed, we described a theme of perspectival incognizance, where the non-autistic person is unable to understand the autistic's needs and perspectives. However, Heisman's study demonstrates this in a two-sided problem that can bring neutrality to understand the need for receptivity, highlighting the differences not deficits, in autistic and non-autistic communication. The double empathy problem may be a key to overcoming impasses that can occur in autistic and non-autistic interactions. Regarding recovery strategies, we created this word cloud shaped as Australia. And as you can see, time, sleep, and alone were the most frequently mentioned. Time being central to recovery, also important with connecting with nature and low sensory environments.
Regards our quantitative data, in linear modeling, it was depression and masking that remained significant in determining autistic burnout severity. We hypothesized masking contributes to autistic burnout, which in turn leads to depression. Lastly, the new Aspire AABM tool showed poor specificity in determining those who are currently or recently experiencing autistic burnout. Although this finding should be replicated in a larger sample, we believe work is needed on measurement tool development. Overall, we want to highlight the importance of co-production and, from our perspective, caution that a deficit focus and misrepresentation could easily occur without the collaboration of autistic researchers. We hope that this work goes some way in building recognition of autistic burnout. More research is needed on validation, measurement, pathways, and supports. We also caution that standard psychological treatments may be contraindicated in autistic burnout, such as CBT or behavioral activation. We've already presented our findings in a number of venues, as you can see listed here. Our first study is already published, and the second study should hopefully be available in the near future. We are seeking collaborators and funding to continue work on autistic burnout and mental health in autism more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam and Julianne, for that presentation. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to have about 20 minutes for questions. So I'd ask all the presenters to turn on their webcams and microphones. And I have already been fielding, there already are some questions for me to start going through. So thank you again, Sandra, Sam, Julianne, Trevor, and Krishna. We appreciate the presentation and the great work that you've put in to your research. Okay, so let me just go to some of these questions. So the first one is for Sandra. Will the data from your project be submitted to the Disability Royal Commission? And that question is from Catherine Anea.
Are we allowed to take questions on notice? I suspect some of it probably will be. That would really be a decision for the Alliance, though, in terms of, obviously, you know, if they're putting in a submission, then I would imagine they will use some of it. Certainly, you know, if other people are putting in submissions and there's particular things that they would really like to have specific data, we would be happy to share. I'm not personally putting in a submission, but I'm pretty sure that the Alliance will be. And I know that I didn't mention it in the presentation. I'm not sure I mentioned it in the application, but I also was invited to present to the TAFE, the Inquiry into Disability in TAFE, about the needs of autistic people in education. So the data is being used for a range of important advocacy purposes beyond just the original data collection.
Great. And just Sandra, another question for you. So I'm taking these in a bit of order. Will there be a project arising from your research on complex needs?
Possibly. I mean, I think the thing, as I mentioned, we've got so much data. I think we've got a list of as long as your arm of projects that we want to do. I mean, we all know this as researchers and advocates and autistic people, doing these sorts of things with zero funding, there's really limit to how much you can do. We are trying to recruit more honours students and master's students to work on various parts of the project. That's certainly an area that is interesting, but as I say, there's a very long list.
I'm sure there is. Okay, Trevor and Krishna, you talked briefly. Can you tell us a little bit about grassroots co-production where co-producers aren't necessarily academics? And again, that's from Catherine Amir.
Do you want to comment first?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind saying something about that, because I don't regard myself as an academic. And I think sometimes there's a great tediousness if you've just got all academics involved in research, to be quite honest. No offense to all the academics who are now listening to this.
Too late.
But I don't think you need to necessarily be an academic, but the process can be quite intimidating. And I suppose in a way it's up to the neurotypical people to make that interaction smooth for us. What do you think, Trevor?
Yes, I fully agree. You know, it can be quite a scary, frightening beast, research, and let's hope that changes the more we involve, you know, in this sense, autistic people. Just an example, Catherine, at Aspect or ARCAT, there are 2 autistic researchers, both part-time, but they are in research assistant positions. So not autistic academics. One or other may continue on in the research field to become so, but yes, and just in terms of this project, there were several other autistic staff, consultants who work across our programs at Aspect who, you know, don't fit the academic bill, but, you know, they are supporting, you know, this project and others.
Krishna, just perhaps a question from me, where you mentioned that it is intimidating to get involved, and you'd like to, I guess, some help, see some help in the process. Could you perhaps maybe talk to that a little bit more about the kinds of things that would make it easier to participate?
Well, just even consideration for the environment when you first meet, you know, being prepared for that environment, for the environment to be sensory friendly and all of those things, that sets the scene. And then I suppose communicating in a way that's user friendly. I think it's actually quite useful for academics to remember that they're doing this for people that are predominantly not necessarily academic, so that they need to sort of tailor their views a little bit more openly, I suppose. But yes, making the whole process welcoming and predictable and understandable.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm just taking another question for you, Krishna, here. So are you hoping to be involved in more research projects in the future? And are there any topics that you personally think need more attention?
I think I would like to be probably more heavily involved. You know, I think this was more a little bit of not a little experiment, but it was more an experiment on my part. So I do feel I have more to contribute. And if we're looking at pet projects, I was thinking about that just now. My area in social work has been sudden death and grief and loss. And I would really like more research into connecting grief and autistic people, because sometimes there's a disconnect there, or autistic people grieving can be misinterpreted in a way or misunderstood. So research into that field would be great. And I suppose the other thing, which is another pet interest, is that I'm getting ancient now, and I'd really like to see some more research into aging and autism, so that if I start getting a bit decrepit, I've got some idea that people around me, you know, who might be caring for me, are better equipped than they are currently. And that would, yes, so they're my two sort of main things.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Krishna. Moving to Sam and Julianne now. Did your research uncover what is the best way to distinguish autistic burnout from regular burnout? And can autistic people experience regular burnout? So that's a big question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you want to say something first.
Yeah,
I think it's.
Do you want to go first, Sam? Or I was just going to say an autistic burnout, an autistic can only experience an autistic burnout. It is by virtue of being autistic that what we're studying arises. The interaction with the world that is not really suited to our needs, and that causes sets us up for heading for burnout really every day. But as we go through life and encounter a variety of situations, the more and more we have to do with systemic structures of the dominant culture and interactions with members of the dominant culture, it places a huge burden upon us because we have to accommodate their needs. They are not aware of our needs. And autistic burnout is autistic burnout by virtue that we are autistic. It is different from usually non-autistic burnout is associated with employment. And in our study, not one person identified employment as being a main associative thing with burnout. So it's quite a separate thing. I'll let Sam go on now because I'm getting a little bit jittery.
Just reinforce, yeah, the occupational burnout is usually linked to employment, which particularly in our phase 1 wasn't reported by participants, but it is something that we want to do more research in, and I think there's still more to be done in the area. I think, and the question around could a autistic person experience occupational burnout? Well, I think they could, but autistic burnout from what we've learned so far is very much different.
So the question was about regular burnout as opposed to occupational, but
so I think that's one of the difficulties in the literature. What regular burnout is occupational burnout.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
And just in terms of just your thoughts around occupational burnout, did you have any thoughts about why that wasn't being reflected in the research? That wasn't coming up?
Julianne could probably speak to this more, but I think the stresses that people were reporting and leading to the onset of their autistic burnout were wide. And it's that unaccommodating neurotypical world was often a sort of thematic aspect to the onset of the stresses that participants were reporting.
I think, yeah, when in our studies we found that people who were employed were having experiencing burnout. It wasn't that that no autistics were employed, but there are less autistics employed than otherwise. But it is the day. It's not as if it's the everyday situation that that sets up for autistic burnout, whereas that's not the case in non-autistic burnout. The employment situation, I suppose it can, we need, as Sam said, we need to do more work on that, but to aggravate the situation, it places extra restrictions, extra demands. There are extra sort of layers of what one is supposed to conform to, what an autistic person, the way that we go about things is quite different. So if we have to be other than ourselves, if we're masking all the time, that adds to the stress and exhaustion. So it's what ordinary life is, what happens in ordinary life to us. It doesn't happen so much when we're in nature.
All right. And probably just a last question now for Sandra. Are there any research or translation projects you would like to see happen in the future?
How long have you got? So many. I mean, I think there are just so very, very many areas where we aren't doing inclusive research and we aren't doing collaborative research. Certainly some of the areas that are particularly interesting to me are around aging and autism. I'd really like to do some more work on the impacts of adult diagnosis. I would basically say pretty much pick up any autism research journal and have a look at the topics in there. And we all as autistic people read some of those things and absolutely cringe and think, okay, whoever wrote this actually has no idea what it's like inside my world. So yeah, I certainly, if anyone is interested in following that conversation up outside of this, I'd be very happy to share any of my very long list of projects that need to be done.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Sandra, Sam, Julianne, Trevor, and Krishna. I really appreciate your presentations as well as the opportunity to ask you some questions. So I'm now going to hand back over to Andrew Davis, our CEO, to close.
Thanks, Voy. And again, thank you to Sandra, Sam, Julianne, Trevor and Krishna for your presentations, and congratulations again on your exceptional projects. I want to thank, again, as Rob did earlier, all those people who were entrants to the Research Excellence Awards this year and those who participated in the review process. It's most appreciated. We value the time and energy you've given to it. That brings us to an end of our session this evening. We're just about on time. I don't want to keep you. Thank you to those people, particularly who've stayed late in New Zealand and in the southern states where you have daylight saving. I'm jealous. And thanks again for joining us and all your support and contributions to the CRC and the exceptional success. It's only through your combined efforts that our unique collaboration is addressing such many challenges in research, practice and policy. And we look forward to continue working with you to fully realise our vision to see autistic people empowered to use their diverse strengths and interests.